I knew something was off the second I turned the corner onto my street and saw the crowd gathered in front of my house. Phones were out, people whispering, a couple of teenagers laughing. I parked my truck and got out slowly, heart already pounding. Then I saw it. In huge, red spray painted letters across the front of my white siding. Evict. I stood there for a moment, just staring, like my brain couldn't process it. Then I heard her voice, the one that could make your blood pressure spike just by existing. "Oh good, you're home," said Karen. Her real name was Debra, but everyone in the neighborhood, even the other HOA members, called her Karen behind her back. She was the president of the Oak Glen HOA, and if you left your trash bin out for more than 30 seconds past pickup, she'd slap you with a violation notice and a $75 fine. I turned to face her. She was standing on the edge of my lawn in her tennis skirt and visor, arms crossed and lips curled like she'd just stepped in something foul. "What the hell is this, Debra?" I asked, pointing to the graffiti. "It's a warning, Brandon," she said, like I was the one in the wrong. "You've been parking your work truck in your driveway overnight. That's against HOA rules." "It's my driveway. And we sent you 3 notices. You ignored them." "I didn't ignore anything," I wrote back and explained I'm a welder. "I need my truck. I even had the city verify my zoning allows it." "We don't care what the city says," she snapped. "This neighborhood is under HOA jurisdiction. You agreed to our rules when you bought in." I took a deep breath. "So, your solution is to vandalize my property?" Her face twitched just a little. "We had to send a message. Maybe now you'll take us seriously." I looked around. A few neighbors were still watching. Some looked uncomfortable. One guy across the street shook his head and walked back inside. I said nothing else. Just walked inside, shut the door behind me and locked it. But I wasn't done. I was just getting started. What she didn't know was that 2 weeks ago, I installed a new security camera system after someone had keyed my truck. I'd suspected Debra and her little HOA goon squad were behind it, but I hadn't had proof. Now I had a full HD video of 3 HOA members: Debra, her lapdog secretary Linda, and their enforcer Doris, a retired postal worker with a serious attitude problem spray painting the word across my wall at 2:30 in the morning. I copied the footage onto a flash drive and made 3 backups. Then I called a friend of mine, Preston Viller, a local attorney who used to be on the city council. We'd known each other since high school. "You're not going to believe what these lunatics just did," I said. By the time I was done showing him the footage, he leaned back in his chair and said, "We're going to bury them." And we would. But first I needed to play it smart. I wasn't just going to sue them. I was going to get them convicted. By the next morning, word had spread like wildfire. The HOA had crossed a line, and even some of their regular supporters were starting to get nervous. I could sense it the moment I stepped outside. People who usually waved looked away. A few passers-by slowed down near the house, then sped up when I made eye contact. No one said anything to my face. Not yet. That day, I didn't go to work. Instead, I drove over to Preston's office downtown. "First thing we do," he said, flipping open a yellow legal pad, "is file a criminal complaint for vandalism and trespassing. I'll walk it straight to the precinct myself." I nodded. "They need to feel this. I want charges, not just fines. I want real consequences." "You'll get them," he said. "But we're also going to open a civil suit. Harassment, defamation, property damage, emotional distress, the works." He leaned forward, tapping his pen against the desk. "But there's something else I want to check. You said they ignored city zoning. Flat out told me they didn't care." Preston's eyes lit up. "That might be key. If they knowingly enforced restrictions that contradict municipal code, they could be operating outside their legal authority. That would nullify a lot of their power." He made a few calls right then and there to a city clerk and a zoning attorney he knew. Meanwhile, I handed over the flash drive with the footage. He watched it again, this time with the sound turned up. The voices were clear as day. "Make it big," Linda had whispered. "He has to see it from the street." Doris, holding the can, replied, "This'll shut him up." And Debra, her tone chillingly casual, added, "If it doesn't, we'll escalate." Preston glanced up at me. "They're cooked." By lunchtime, he had already filed the criminal complaint and submitted a copy of the footage to the local police department. I didn't expect a fast response, but the officer at the front desk took one look at the evidence and called in a detective. Detective Morales met us in a conference room half an hour later. She was sharp-eyed, no nonsense, and didn't waste time. "Usually, HOA disputes are civil matters," she said, scanning through the footage on a tablet. "But this is deliberate property destruction and targeted harassment. I'll open a formal investigation. You'll hear from us soon." Back at home that evening, I noticed something odd. Debra's prized flower beds, always meticulously maintained, had been torn up. Not destroyed, exactly, but the mulch was scattered, and several of the tulips were missing. A small note was stuck in her mailbox, flapping slightly in the breeze. I wasn't the only one fed up. 2 days later, the police issued subpoenas for the 3 women involved. The HOA board tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, claiming it was a community art project gone awry, but no one was buying it. The neighborhood message board lit up with reactions. Some defended them, but more and more people were asking questions they hadn't dared to ask before. Preston and I didn't wait. We held an open meeting at the local community center and invited every resident in Oak Glen. I brought printed copies of the HOA bylaws and highlighted the sections that contradicted city zoning. Preston laid out the legal ramifications of board members abusing their authority. "Here's the truth," he said, pacing the front of the room. "They've been issuing fines they had no legal right to enforce. They've been threatening residents into compliance, using fabricated rules. And now, they've escalated to criminal behavior." One man in the back raised his hand. "What happens if we just stop paying their fines?" "If the fines are based on invalid rules," Preston replied, "they're unenforceable. But don't just stop cold, document everything. We're building a collective case." A woman near the front stood up. "Last year, they threatened to foreclose on my house over a fence I built with city approval. Said it was non-conforming. I paid them over $3,000 just to make them go away." Several others chimed in with similar stories. Fines for mailbox colors. Threats over lawn height. One man had been cited for having a wind chime that disrupted community harmony. After the meeting, a small crowd gathered around me. "You're not the only one they've targeted," a retired firefighter named Glenn said. "They tried to fine me for having an American flag on my porch. Said it wasn't aesthetically consistent. They fined me for hanging Christmas lights before December 1st, another woman added. That night, I created a private group chat and added everyone who had spoken up. We started collecting documents, fine notices, letters, photos, and any correspondence with the HOA. Within 3 days, we had over 50 residents involved. Preston called it a goldmine. Then came the knock at my door. Detective Morales stood on my porch with a folder in her hand. "We've reviewed your footage," she said, "and we've interviewed the suspects." All 3 gave conflicting statements. 2 tried to pin it on the 3rd. That tells me they're scared, which means we're moving forward. "What's the charge?" "Felony vandalism and criminal conspiracy. Possibly more, depending on how deep this goes." I didn't say much, I was still processing. But I watched her get back into her cruiser with a quiet sense of satisfaction. Over the next week, things unraveled fast for Debra and her cronies. The HOA office, really just a converted garage space behind Debra's house, was raided by local police. Boxes of records were seized. I heard from a neighbor that Doris was seen crying on her porch the next morning. Linda left town entirely, supposedly visiting her sister out west. But no one believed that. Then came the court summonses. Preston filed the civil suit on behalf of all 50 residents. It accused the HOA board of harassment, fraud, and unlawful enforcement of non-binding rules. The local news caught wind of it. A reporter showed up at my house with a camera crew. I gave a brief statement, keeping it simple. We're just tired of being bullied. This is our neighborhood, too. When the story aired, more residents came forward. A nurse named Trina shared how the HOA had fined her for parking in front of her own home after a double shift. A single dad described how they tried to charge him for his daughter's sidewalk chalk. The judge granted a preliminary injunction. The HOA board was barred from issuing further fines or enforcing any regulations until the court could determine the legitimacy of their authority. That same week, Detective Morales called again. "We found something in their records," she said. "They've been manipulating meeting minutes, backdating votes, forging signatures, even creating fake violation logs for residents they wanted out. This isn't just harassment anymore. We're looking at organized fraud." I stayed quiet for a moment, then asked, "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that the DA's office is opening a grand jury investigation." The next HOA meeting, normally held in the small rec center, was relocated to the larger town hall, and for the first time in years, every seat was filled. Debra was nowhere to be seen. The interim board, hastily assembled from a few neutral residents, announced a full audit and a vote to dissolve the current leadership structure. As the meeting ended, Glenn clapped me on the back. "You started something big, kid." I didn't respond. I was already thinking about the next step. Because it wasn't just about punishing Debra and her little empire. It was about making sure no one could ever do this again. The morning after the injunction was announced, I found a folded letter shoved halfway into my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just my name printed in jagged handwriting across the front. I opened it without stepping inside. "Back off or you'll regret it. Stay quiet and let things go back to normal." No signature. Just that one line. The paper smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, same kind Debra's goon Doris always used when she was going on her beautification patrols. I didn't need handwriting analysis to know where it came from. I walked it straight to the precinct. Detective Morales took it seriously. She slipped on gloves, bagged the letter, and ordered a fingerprint scan. "They're getting desperate," she said. "That's when people get sloppy." I wasn't afraid. I was angry. The kind of angry that makes you dig deeper. Preston and I met that afternoon in the city archives. There was something he wanted me to see: minutes from the original HOA incorporation, scanned copies of the founding documents, and a ledger of all financial transactions filed with the city over the last 10 years. "These are the ones they didn't think to forge," he said. "Because they didn't know they were public record." We sat side by side in the dusty basement for hours, flipping through pages. That's when we found it, a payment listed under community improvement, a wire transfer of $22,000 made out to a company called Briarwood Environmental Services. The problem? Briarwood had been dissolved 5 years before the payment date. Legally, it didn't exist when the money was supposedly sent. I looked over at Preston. "You think they made up a fake company?" He nodded once. "Or funneled the money through a relative using the old name as cover. Either way, it's fraud." We compiled the documents, made copies, and added it to the growing file we were building with the DA's office. That night, the city accountant confirmed that no permits, work orders, or inspection records matched the payment. The project it supposedly funded, a native xeriscape project, had never materialized. The next day, Glenn stopped by my house holding a plastic grocery bag. He handed it over without a word. Inside were 12 shredded HOA violation letters. Each had been postmarked from different dates over the past 2 years, but bore the exact same barcode, same ink pattern, and same signature: Debra's. "They fined my son's house while he was deployed," Glenn said. "He didn't even know until they tried to put a lien on it." I pieced these together once I realized something was off. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" I asked. "I didn't think anyone would care." Now they did. Preston brought in a forensic document examiner. Not only were the barcodes identical, but the timestamps indicated they were all printed within the same 3-hour window months after the supposed violations. It was retroactive punishment meant to trap people into paying fines they never actually received. Meanwhile, the grand jury convened. Testimonies began. I wasn't allowed inside, but residents who were called and told me what they could. Most were simply asked to verify their stories, share their records, and identify voices from the footage we'd collected. Then the fire marshal stepped up. Apparently, Debra had reported a neighbor, Angela, a single mother of 2, for illegal storage of hazardous material in her garage. The HOA had filed a formal complaint using a falsified inspection report supposedly signed by the local fire marshal. But when the real marshal was shown the document, he laughed. "I've never even been to Oak Glen," he told the grand jury. That was the final nail. The local prosecutor filed charges against all 3 women, Debra, Linda, and Doris. The list was extensive: felony vandalism, fraud, criminal conspiracy, document forgery, and obstruction. The charges weren't just symbolic. They came with real jail time. News crews returned. This time, they weren't just covering a neighborhood dispute, they were covering a criminal case. The story hit local headlines and even made it onto a regional station. The footage of the word "evict" painted across my house played on a loop. But the part that hit hardest was the community response. For the first time in years, the people of Oak Glen came together. Neighbors who'd never spoken started organizing. Volunteers' power washed my siding. Someone dropped off a new mailbox after mine was smashed overnight. A pair of high schoolers repainted the curb numbers that had been mysteriously blacked out with tar. At the next emergency meeting, held under police supervision, a vote was held to dissolve the current HOA board entirely. An independent management company was brought in temporarily, and a new election was scheduled under direct city oversight. I didn't run for a seat. I didn't want power, just peace. But I did one last thing. I filed a motion with the city to reclassify Oak Glen as a neighborhood under direct municipal governance. The HOA had, for years, claimed authority they didn't legally have. Now, with the evidence of misuse and fraud, the motion passed. Oak Glen was stripped of its HOA status permanently. The properties, once bound by overreaching restrictions, were now governed solely by city code. No more fines for wind chimes. No more threats over work trucks or flags or Christmas lights. The neighborhood could finally breathe. At the sentencing, each woman stood silently. Debra's lawyer tried to argue for leniency, citing a history of public service, but the judge wasn't buying it. "You used your position to intimidate, harass, and deceive. You treated residents like pawns instead of people," he said. "This court finds no justification for your actions." Sentences were handed down. Debra received 18 months in county jail with mandatory restitution. Linda got 12 months, suspended after 6 with probation. Doris, who had cooperated with the investigation late in the process, was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest and a fine. Outside the courthouse, I stood with Glenn, Angela, and about 20 others. "We did it," Glenn said quietly. Angela wiped her eyes. "I almost sold my house last year because of them."
"I'm glad you stayed."
I looked down the steps toward the street, where a group of teens were taping a handmade sign to a lamppost. It read, "Welcome to Oak Glen, no kings, no queens, just neighbors." That night, for the first time in a long while, I parked my truck in my driveway, sat on the porch with a beer, and listened to nothing but the sound of wind through the trees. No threats, no letters, no fake violations, just peace. 3 weeks after the sentencing, things around Oak Glen were still raw. Neighbors were cautious but hopeful, like they were learning to walk again after years of being told how to stand. The old HOA sign, once bolted to a stone pillar at the entrance, had been removed by the city. In its place was a simple wooden welcome plaque, hand-painted by a high school art student. Oak Glen, a neighborhood, not a regime. I thought things had finally calmed down. But then Preston called me one morning, his voice low and clipped.
We need to meet.
Something new came in. We sat across from each other in a corner booth at a diner near City Hall. He slid a manila folder across the table unopened. Anonymous drop-off, he said. It was waiting in the mailbox outside my office this morning. No return address. I opened it. Inside were scanned copies of bank withdrawal slips, handwritten notes detailing meeting dates and cash pickups, and a spreadsheet listing names and amounts next to what looked like project codes. One column simply read, "Transfers petty cash." I flipped to the last page. It was a scan receipt of a withdrawal from the HOA's reserve fund, $64,000, signed off by Debra and countersigned by someone I hadn't seen before, Randall K. Dewhurst. Who's Dewhurst? I asked. Preston pulled out his phone and tapped a few times. He turned the screen to me. Former HOA treasurer. Resigned 2 years ago. No one's seen him since. But if this is accurate, he was still authorizing fund access well after he supposedly quit. Everything about it felt off. The numbers didn't track with any improvement work, and some of the names listed on the spreadsheet weren't even residents. Preston flagged one in particular, Celeste Arnott. She was listed under consulting. But a city permit specialist confirmed she never worked with the HOA or the city. She's Dewhurst's niece, Preston said. And she lives 3 counties over. Never stepped foot in Oak Glen. I leaned back in the booth, rubbing my hands together. So, what are we looking at here? He lowered his voice. Embezzlement. Possibly wire fraud. And if they were laundering HOA funds through fake vendors, that's a whole new level. We brought the file to Detective Morales. She reviewed it silently, page by page, her eyes narrowing with every sheet. This is more than mismanagement, she said. This is organized financial crime. You don't move this kind of money by accident. She handed the file off to a financial crimes investigator who began cross-referencing the listed withdrawals with bank logs. It didn't take long before patterns started surfacing: multiple withdrawals, just under reporting thresholds, routed through banks in neighboring counties, always co-signed by Debra and this Dewhurst guy. But Dewhurst had vanished. The city issued a subpoena for HOA financial records from the past 5 years. The independent audit team we'd hired recovered backups from an old hard drive left in the HOA office. Hidden among spreadsheets for landscaping contracts and security patrols was a folder marked private/do not open. Inside were scanned invoices for services that never existed: tree trimming done in the dead of winter, fence repairs for homes that didn't have fences, and inspection fees for properties that had been vacant for years. All of them tied back to bank accounts in Dewhurst's name. Preston took it further. He traced one of the vendor names, Pine and Pebble Consulting, to a P.O. box registered in Dewhurst's name. That was the last piece. The DA's office issued a warrant, and 2 days later, Dewhurst was found in a rented cabin outside of Redding, California, living under a false name and working under-the-table construction jobs. He was brought back in cuffs. When the charges hit the news, it was like reopening a wound everyone thought had finally scabbed over. Embezzlement. Money laundering.
Fraud.
Over $120,000 had been siphoned from HOA funds over 4 years. That money was supposed to maintain the community, repair sidewalks, support seasonal events, even fund a new playground that never got built. Instead, it had gone into private accounts, vacation rentals, and fake consulting fees. At Dewhurst's arraignment, the courtroom was packed. Residents filled every bench. The judge denied bail, citing flight risk and the elaborate nature of his deception. Debra, already serving her sentence, was hit with an additional charge of conspiracy to commit fraud. She refused to speak in the courtroom, but a letter she wrote was read aloud by her lawyer. It was full of excuses: stress, overwork, a desire to maintain high standards in the face of overwhelming community apathy. No apology. No accountability. It only made things worse. The city council called a special meeting to review how Oak Glen had been allowed to run unchecked for so long. Representatives from the Department of Neighborhood Oversight showed up with a list of proposed reforms: mandatory financial disclosures, term limits for board members, and annual audits for any neighborhood association operating within city limits. I was asked to speak at the meeting. I didn't prepare a speech. I just stood at the podium and spoke from the gut. This started with a word spray painted on my wall, I said. But it was never just about me. This was about control, about people abusing power in the shadows because no one wanted to look too closely. Well, we looked, and now we know, and we aren't going back. The reforms passed unanimously. Oak Glen became the pilot program for a new city initiative, Neighborhood Integrity Watch. Every resident was granted access to a portal where they could review public finances, submit anonymous concerns, and vote on key decisions. A rotating council of residents, not a permanent board, was established to oversee neighborhood issues with city oversight. Life returned to a new kind of normal. Not perfect, but better. Angela started a weekend breakfast club for single parents. Glenn organized a community tool bank where people could check out lawnmowers, ladders, or power washers. The city repainted crosswalks and approved a long-delayed sidewalk expansion. One evening, I was walking home from the hardware store when I noticed two kids drawing on the sidewalk with neon chalk rockets, stars, and a giant smiling sun. Their mom was sitting nearby, sipping iced tea from a mason jar. She waved. "Do you want to add something?" she asked. I knelt down, picked up a piece of blue chalk, and drew a simple outline of a house. Then I added a roof and a little chimney. One of the kids looked over. "Is that your house?" I nodded. "Looks peaceful," he said. "It is now," I told him. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I looked around at everything we had reclaimed. Not just property, but dignity.
Voice. Choice.
We weren't a perfect neighborhood, but we were ours again, and no one would ever paint us out of it.